Hello everybody, my name is Trijal and welcome back to my channel Trijal Creates and welcome back to my podcast, the Tyre Smoke podcast also. This is episode 3 of the podcast and the title that I've given is Analogue Legends Raw Driving Machines. We shall see why in a bit, but before that, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Now in today's video, we shall be looking at 4 of the greatest driver's cars of all time. Now let's move on. Now analog legends, raw driving machines. Now most supercars nowadays are hybrids or have a lot of electronic assists like ABS, traction control, ESC, and they usually make the the speed fun and easy. That means like with just a press of the throttle you would be going 250 kilometers per hour and with very minimal steering correction, and the computers would take care of you until you had to brake. But in these cars, it was not like that. If you wanted to go fast in these cars, you needed to have some skill. Otherwise, you would be ruining your insurance underwriter's year. Now, let's get started. So, the first driver's car that I'm going to talk about is the McLaren F1. This is the McLaren F1. Now this is the most iconic car of the lot, very arguably. And yeah, this car had been the fastest car in the world for a few years actually. Not a few, my bad. 10 years, and it still holds the record. It held the record for 20 years of the fastest naturally aspirated car on the planet. But above all of this, it was the greatest driver's car on earth. Now, if you were a driver and you were very keen on taking on a challenge, this was the car for you. This car was challenging to drive at high speeds, and it was intentionally designed so. Basically, this car was McLaren's road car debut, and earlier to that, they had been, of course, involving in Formula 1, Can-Am. They had also been involved in building a certain Buick Regal GNX, which is one of the most influential muscle cars of its day and could actually beat a Ferrari in a straight line. So, McLaren definitely had some sporting heritage before they went into this. Now, who was the man they commissioned to design this car? Well, none other than the man himself, Gordon Murray. Now, who was Gordon Murray? Well, he was a former F1 designer. He worked at Brabham and created the very famous BT46 fan car. And what does a fan car mean? Well, basically, there's a fan at the back of the car controlled by either an electric motor or engine or the engine itself, but it's spun like opposite to the engine's direction, which would throw out air from some inlets. From some outlets, my bad. And basically what was this effect? Well, it created a suction which sucked the car onto the ground, and this basically meant that you had more grip, which means you can go faster around the corners. However, he didn't do this for the F1, but he did something, well, even more crazy. Basically, this car was powered by a BMW V12. As you can see in the picture, it says BMW M Power, of course. And it took a long time to develop, but boy was it worth it. This was meant to be one of the greatest driver's cars of all time, and you wouldn't have traction control, ESC, ABS, and nor did you have any driver modes. Like, you didn't have a sport mode, you didn't have a comfort mode, nothing like that. But however, it was very luxurious though. I can say that for its credit. It was very luxurious. It had a CD player, which for the 90s is not bad, and yeah, it was one of the greatest driver's cars of all time, and unintentionally, in fact, Gordon Murray never thought about this, that it would be the fastest car for a very long time in the world. And up till 2016, when the Ferrari 812 Superfast came around, it was the fastest naturally aspirated car. That is a car that has no turbos or no supercharger in the world. And yeah, this car was very brilliantly conceived by Gordon Murray. He always intended it to be a driver's car, and he always intended it to be a road car, really. This was never meant to go racing. However, after some very expensive examples were sold. Only 150 were ever made, and the seats were tailored to each customer's preference. That is, whoever's sitting in the driver's seat, they have a seat tailored to their needs. Like, it would be based upon their body, the seat. So yeah, that was there, and it had very clear dials, all around visibility. So it would make a perfect race car, wouldn't it? However, Gordon Murray was not very keen on making it a race car. He said to his boss that if he wanted to go racing with it, he was a race car designer, and he would compromise the whole thing. He would make it a longer tail. He would put on a huge spoiler. It would look big and ugly. And so the boss, of course, he was not very happy to listen to this. So he was like, okay, we're not going racing with it. However, after a few McLaren F1s were sold, the customers were, of course, very keen on a race debut. They were very curious to see how this thing would actually perform on a real racetrack. So of course, Gordon Murray was like, okay, fine, I'll do it for once. And they entered 3 McLaren F1s into the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and they won. They won by a considerable margin. This was the first road car since 40 years up till that time that had won at Le Mans. That means that this was a car that won at Le Mans. At the same time, you could go the next day and buy this thing. Now you might argue that these, could be GT3 cars. GT3 cars are the same thing, right? But do they ever win first overall? No, GT3s, they always come 17th overall. But some of them will come first in their class, right? This thing came first overall. So yeah, this is a pretty big achievement, an achievement that is trying to be replicated by the modern Aston Martin Valkyrie LMH, if you've seen it. Crazy car. I'm rooting for them. Hope they win the WEC season. Anyway, back to the topic. And this car had spawned quite a few other more savage, stripped down iterations called the McLaren F1 GTR and the McLaren F1 LM. And these cars set a speed record of 380 kilometers per hour. Now this was the road car, basically. And yeah, to take $4 billion in research, a W16 and 4 turbos to eclipse that figure by only 20 kilometers per hour 10 years later. What was this car's name? Well, it's a very familiar one, Bugatti Veyron. And yeah, this was the only car up till its time that had breached that magical 400 km per hour barrier. And so, cementing the McLaren F1's reputation in car legacy, it left a lasting impression on the car world, and a lot of its features, which were considered very high-tech for the time, suppose the use of monolithic carbon, that is, the whole body was made from this carbon fiber. So basically it's like this bonded carbon weave and titanium weave in some resin, and there's a very complicated process to make it. That's why most car makers don't do it. But what you get is incredible strength, and it's very, very light. And famously, they had used gold foil for insulation under the engine bay. So you can understand why it was so expensive now, right? And it was also the fastest in terms of acceleration figures for quite a lot of time. It would accelerate 0 to 100 in 3.2 seconds. And yeah, that was the McLaren F1. Now moving on. The Porsche Carrera GT. Now this car was arguably the greatest car ever made by Porsche. The heart of a race car, a carbon clutch, and race spec tires is a very dangerous combination. This case is not an exception. This car was very famous for not forgiving you if you didn't drive it properly. This car required skill to take at the limit. And yeah, this car had quite a few revolutionary features, such as the underfloor of a race car, brakes of a race car, and of course the engine of a race car. And yeah, it is one of the most sought after and greatest Porsche models of all time. And yeah, and as usual, the criteria for this has been fulfilled. No traction control, and it requires quite a bit of skill to drive fast, actually. Moving on. This is the Ford GT40, and arguably this is one of my personal favorites, so I might be a bit biased on this one. But this car was actually born out of a grudge match between Enzo Ferrari and Henry Ford II. To cut a very long story short, Henry Ford decided to buy Ferrari, my bad. And when he took some conditions to Enzo Ferrari was very outraged by the conditions, and he insulted Henry Ford II. Henry Ford II, of course, he was very angry, and he decided to build a race car. Now he threw in a lot of money on this, and he won. Well, his wish was fulfilled. Ford won against Ferrari around 2 times or so before they ran out of money of the project for the project. But this car, the black and white photo that was from 1960s, this car was the car that won the 24 Hours of Le Mans 1966 and 67. And this car is the modern iteration, the one that you can see with the gold rims. That car is the modern iteration of this 1960s car. It is called the Ford GT. Ford GT. There's no faulty in there. And yeah, this was the 2005 Ford GT, and this was its engine on the top. Now, why am I talking about this car and not the 1950s car? Well, because this car was in mass production. The 1950s car, probably 4 road-going prototypes were made, but that's all. And this thing had, of course, a thumping great V8, and it had, well, very less grip. It was highly unstable under braking for some reason. I don't know why. And personally, I prefer the old car over the new 2015 Ford GT40, because it sounds very toneless, and it looks way better, I can tell you that. But yeah, I have an opinion on that. Now, this was the Ford GT40, and it had boasted quite in impressive figures. 0 to 100 took 3.8 or 3.7, and its top speed would be 320 kilometers per hour. And yeah, they didn't go back to Le Mans with this. They went back to Le Mans with the 2015 Ford GT40. And yeah, this was the Ford GT40, and it was famously very unstable under braking, very spinnable as usual. What do you expect? It's American. And yeah, this was the Ford GT40. Moving on. This car is called the Shelby Cobra, and the particular car that you see pictured in here is the Cobra 427 S/C. Now, what this meant was it had a engine of 427 cubic inches, which is like 7 liters or 7000 cc if you're Indian, and it was semi-competition. That's why the S/C. Now, this Shelby Cobra was actually the brainchild of this very legendary man called Carroll Shelby. Now, he was one of the first Americans to win at Le Mans, and he was a pure racer. Now, one day he saw an NACS going around. An ACS was this small British car. It was in fact we'll get to that later on. I'll tell you what it is exactly. And ACS, he saw it once. He opened up the hood or the bonnet, and he saw how much space was there between the engine and the bonnet clearance. He saw how much space was there, and he was thinking, well, an American V8 could fit in that, couldn't it? And what did he do? Well, surprise, surprise. A few years later, he put out the first model. That was, he took an ACS. He put in a 289 cubic inch or 4.7 liter or basically 4700 cc V8 in it, and he nicknamed it the AC Cobra 289. Now, this car was very fast. It was meant for the racetrack, and their main goal was beat the Corvettes, which were all dominant at the time, and or the Jaguar E-types, which were also very dominant at the time in sports car racing. Now, I'm happy to say that they did both. They beat the Corvette, they beat the E-type Jaguars, and they beat quite a few Ferraris too. So yeah, that's a win for Shelby Cobra. And the version that you see pictured over here, and the most talked about version of the Shelby Cobra, is the Shelby Cobra 427 S/C. Now, this car had a 427 cubic inch or 7 liter or 7000 cc engine, and basically this was the Le Mans iteration. That means this one went to Le Mans, and it did quite well in its class, but mainly they dominated sports car racing throughout the 60s. I mean, I could imagine the sigh of relief when they retracted this thing from sports car racing. Jaguar must have been like, oh, they're gone finally, now we can win again. Because literally, these cars were so fast. 0 to 100 took 4.2 seconds, and this was out of the 1960s, mind you. 4.2 seconds, that's not bad. That would beat an Alpine any day, like the modern Alpine A110. And it would beat quite a few other sports cars too. Boxsters, one particular 911. And it was also, well, it's American, what do you expect? It's of course it's fast in drag racing. And it's quite sketchy at high speeds. That means that you needed real skill to actually put this through a corner and come back out in one piece. And this particular car is a very good example. It's some 427S/C, and well, it had basically the same AC Cobra chassis, but it was swapped for a V8, had different transaxles, and also they had widened out the body a little bit so to accommodate fatter tires for the amount of traction they needed. So yeah, that was the Shelby Cobra 427S/C, if you can see it over here. And yeah, that was it. Those are the 4 cars I wanted to talk about today. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you liked this episode of the podcast. If you did like it, please like and subscribe. Check out my other videos. Check out the other podcast episodes when you have time. Thanks for listening. This is me, Trijal, signing off. Thank you.